Hello, I'm Dan Willgohs, AgroVantage Marketing Manager, and it's my pleasure to be on the call this evening discussing the AgroVantage system. Also on the call with me is Isaiah Akers, AgroVantage Product Specialist. Welcome, Isaiah. For tonight's call, we'll be discussing foliar feeding and strategies to optimize the efficiency and crop response for foliar feeding. Foliar feeding is a practice that can have and provide significant returns on investment. However, it must be done in the right way and at the right time to ensure effectiveness. Things like selecting the right formulation, spraying at the right time of day, weather conditions, crop staging, all can play a drastic role in changing the crop's response to foliar feeding. And before we get into some of the specifics, Isaiah, would you give us a review of foliar feeding and why growers might want to apply fertilizer to the foliage or the leaves as compared to a soil application?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll kind of give a little bit of an introduction into foliar feeding. And as we know, one of the biggest reasons we like to push foliar feeding is just because a lot of the modern crop genetics, with the fact that, you know, every year we're increasing that crop potential, that yield potential about 2 to 3%, leads to basically a plateau in what we can achieve by using just standard fertility, basically the old practices that we've been doing for years and years. So that's led to the evolution of a lot of practices with regards to fertilization and fertility. And one of those things that's come about is foliar feeding. So it's all about taking advantage of that better genetics and those increased crop potentials to do several different practices. Foliar feeding is one of them. So as we know, a lot of these uptake curves are different than what they used to be. Corn modern hybrids take up a lot of nitrogen later in the growing season than they ever did, building that yield and pushing all those nutrients into the yield. So that really opens up a window for applying nitrogen mid-season using a foliar feed application. Another reason we might use foliar feeding is just because of the difference in efficiency compared to maybe, you know, some guys even today we'll do a broadcast in season, or maybe ban a dry fertilizer in season. You know, that's a way to get fertilizer out there, but compared to a foliar fertilizer, we're a lot more efficient when we're spraying that fertilizer directly onto the leaves. You're not giving that nutrient, whether it be nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or even some of the micronutrients. You're not giving those nutrients the chance or the likelihood to tie up in the soil. You're avoiding any of those soil issues like a high pH, a low CEC, that might cause issues with that uptake through the roots. You're really putting it right onto the leaves where it can be taken up by the stomata, or those pores in the leaves that are responsible for gas exchange, pulling in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, from the air, but also for pulling in nutrients via these foliar feeds. Another thing is really the flexibility of timing using foliar feeds. The fact that you can really get out there at any stage throughout the growing season, as long as that canopy isn't really overreaching the height of those spray booms. So you've basically got several different options. You can target maybe some of those earlier applications, supplement some extra P and K, whereas later in the growing seasons, maybe in those reproductive stages for corn, we might focus more on nitrogen. And I think we'll focus a little bit on those strategies later on in the call. Another thing, especially with years where we might have delayed planting, is that you can kind of help to get the plants back on track. Maybe mitigate some of the issues that you might have seen from delayed planting, kind of rush those plants back to the maturity levels that they might see if they would have been planted a week before, or week and a half before, things like that. So we'll get into the specifics there. I kind of just gave a little bit of a general breakdown of foliar feeding, the things we can do. But Dan, can we kind of move into and shift the ballgame into the AgroVantage system, and how exactly do we fit into foliar feeding? You know, what are some of the benefits of using a liquid product and a liquid system like ours when we are foliar feeding?
Sure, thanks for that, and thanks for the explanation there, Isaiah. You know, foliar feeding is one of those tools that you can reach for and use at the upper end. And to me, I think with foliar feeding, you have to have a good, sound soil fertility program underneath before you look to utilize foliar feeding. But there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different things to look at and consider when we're talking about foliar feeding.